All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in for this Sunday Simply Test Me hackathon. I'm going to work on refactoring a bunch of the JavaScript code. Test Me, the new version, leverages a React app for the form. And if I can get to it, it's not a huge mess, but it's kind of a mess. It was very much just worked on from the beginning and then kind of extended upon. And one of the ways it works is there's like this root context that is shared between all of the things. And this did not grow and adapt. Or it grew, but it didn't really get refactored. Like you can see here, we have this selected project and version. I don't have it up and running, but if I go to beta there and I start Docker, so it has this set project and launch sandbox. Well, before the project was just like a string, and then the version was separate. So if I type in like password policy, you see we have a version. But then it turned into like setting the main project and then setting any sub projects. And it's kind of a mess. It works. It works though, but it needs a good refactoring because we eventually got a data model set up where the launch definition is a project, the Drupal version, the install profile, manual install, and additional projects. And inside project info, we have the title, short name, type, sandbox, and version. So in the React app, version kind of sits aside of it, and I ended up making the set main project function or hook that gets passed down to child projects. So I feel like we need to refactor this a bit more to be like a single object and then kind of split things out because it's a giant file that has all the components. The components weren't really split out. And we're going to just do a lot of refactoring today in our React code. Before I begin, I do want to give a shout out to the sponsors that make the SimplyTest.me project possible and continues its development. Tugboat provides all of our sandbox environments. So when you click launch sandbox, you're actually on Tugboat's infrastructure with a preview environment, and they're the fastest platform for the creation of preview environments. I use them for my clients. Amazy.io is hosting the new site. So that's provided in kind and is managed on their Lagoon cloud hosting platform. And Amazy.io is really cool because Lagoon is an open sourced hosting system built on top of Kubernetes. So their hosting platform is open source. If you wanted to, you could roll your own. And I'm fairly certain, I heard like one agency is doing that and then paying Amazy for support. Like, so not only can you get your site hosted, but you could run your own hosting infrastructure and then you pay them for support, kind of like in the Red Hat model. So that's really cool. And then thanks to our development partners, QED42 has been providing their developer time for the theming because we can't have the site work without it looking like it should. So that's greatly appreciated. And then my own company, Bluehorn Digital, has been providing the backend development. I first got involved back in December when it was like, hey, we need to get this kicked off. And then as part of even paid work, I also do these Sunday live streams as a way to just like let people know what's going on and keep on developing it. And thanks to our sponsors, Centauro, they are a monthly contributor, which helps ensure that there's money to be used to help folks work on the project. And recognition to Maloon and Druid for their long-standing support as infrastructure providers. As I said, SimplyTest.me now uses Tugboat and Amazy.io, but before it was just regular servers that were running everything, and Maloon and Druid supported that from the get-go, so the project wouldn't have been successful without their long-standing support. If you want to help sponsor the project so we can get more development, just keep it running. There is an open collective. Go to opencollective.com, SimplyTestMe. And again, thank you to all of our individual contributors and conferences which have set up sponsorship tiers and then given some of that money back to the project. So it helps folks like me set aside client time to work on this. So now that we've got the sponsor stuff going, let's go ahead and get the site rolling. and Docker is running, so I'll do ddev start. And we're going to start really cleaning this up. What I'll do is if I open our package.json, we're using Laravel Mix to compile things. And Laravel Mix is a wrapper around Webpack. We're currently on Mix 5. I would like to eventually get us to Mix 6 because it cleans up all these commands. It's a lot more nimble, but it works. I don't want to touch it because there's plenty of things that we have to focus on to get this launched. So I'm going to wait for that to finish because in our Webpack configuration, I have browser sync set up and it proxies to the main website. So if I change any of our files, it will cause the browser to refresh, which means I can get like a live reload type scenario, which we're familiar working with on a single page app. But it's kind of hard to replicate that when you're like JavaScript is embedded in a classic application. So anytime I modify our JavaScript, it will reload the page for me. Great. So that's now up and running. Let's go ahead and do, I don't want to hit watch quite yet, though, because it's going to just spin cycles. I think one of the first things I'm going to do is move a bunch of these components into their own. So that way it's easier to identify what's all going on. So the cool part about React is you can just do it. You don't need to have like a specific way, but it can also lead to some mess if you don't put yourself in check, which is exactly what happened here. So the first thing I'm going to do is split out this installation option. So we'll do new file, and we're just going to call it installation options. I know some people like to have folders and then /index so that way you could have all your subcomponents in there. But to start, we're going to go simple and just every component has its own file name. Yes, I want to add it to Git. Before I get too far, I did create an issue on Drupal.org, and I want to create an issue fork so that way I can work off of that branch. So I'm going to copy the commands here. Because those commands add the remote. So if you're not familiar with Git, Git's decentralized. You have different remotes. You treat one as the canonical, which is usually called origin. And then you can pull from different remotes and push them all around. Now I'm going to check out the branch. And it's nice that Drupal.org runs this. So we're going to, one second. Okay, well, you just got to go upstairs. Sorry, apparently Netflix paused and my kids were watching a show, but they should just go outside because it's nice out. So we checked out that branch, and now I'm going to work off of this. So when I do a git push, it will go to my issue fork. All right, so installation options. I'm going to collapse and just copy it out. And we'll say, how do I usually do it? Do I do, yeah, just export default. So we want this to be our default export. And it has no props, which is one thing I want to try to work around too. As a lot of this is pulling, like a lot of these components are pulling a lot from the state. I want to try to do some more abstraction of that. And this has some subcomponents built into it. So let's copy those out as well. Select profile. So this right here would be an example of why we'd want a folder with an index and then sub folders. Is because things were nested and we can move them out. So let's look at this. So right here we can see that these are unused because they're actually required as properties here. So let's go ahead and fix that. So this needs manual install and set manual install as functions, because manual install is the value, and then on change it dispatches that change and sets it. So let's go, and we're also going to import our React props. I'm just going to see if I can do a copy paste. So prop types lets you specify the properties and their types. So think of it as like making it be strictly typed. So let's do, so we're going to do manual installation dot prop types equals, and so manual install is a prop types of, it's a boolean, and we're going to say it's required. And then we have set manual install, and that's a prop type of a function and is also required. So we're able to define the types of our properties that go in there. So now if we go here, you'll see it doesn't have required attribute. So we can see here that, you know, something is wrong. So now we'll do manual install, and we have those being imported from the context. Now what we could alternatively do is, instead of having to pass it in this way, we could actually have those come in from the context, and maybe we'll do that instead. So that way they're kind of they're stateful, but they have a more scoped state. Now, is this the right or wrong way? I actually don't know, but I'm going to do it to try to just keep things, like I said, scoped within just to keep things more contained. So what I've done here is say that manual install checkbox fetches the install state from the launcher context itself, which means that we no longer need these here. And we'll do the same for the select profile. So inside select profile, we have a install profile and set install profile command. Let's copy this here. And wait to see, do we need to select a project? Yes, we do. We actually need all of those there. And here we go. Curious, so if allow, if not, it does a grid, but then this one doesn't do a grid. I feel like this could be simplified as well, because we could have select profile determine if it's allowed or not. So I'm gonna try something. Now we're gonna watch. So we split out installation options. Let's do import, maybe it'll work. Installation options, great. So it did that auto complete for us. Now let's do tailwind package.json. I wish it would show up in the npm scripts here, but it's not. So let's do run. Oh, that's right. For some reason, my node is all kinds of weird on this laptop. Second, let's see if I can quick figure this out. Which node? User bin node. All right, maybe now we've got this. This is handled out. It's finding versions. All right, so let's do watch. Well, we'll just do it the old school way. Node watch. Cannot find module. Node. What? Oh, but I did node. Sorry, I'm totally not with it right now, apparently. All right, so we're gonna use watch, which will give us a browser refresh when we're running through here. Close the wrong site. Let that build. And it should not be broken. So the installation options show up once you pick a project. Just a quick show this before. So when you pick this and you get the advanced options, it's this manual installation and install profile. And I'm curious on the theming. So in the theming of it all, if I can get back to it, it had return P4 border bottom flex. It's using flex columns. I'm going to close this and reopen it in Brave. I'm just curious why we have two different stylings here, where we could still use grid. It would just be a grid column of 2, or we could just use the flex regardless. Let's see why that broke. React is not found. Error in the. Oh. So I thought you didn't have to do import React anymore, but maybe we have an older version of React in here actually. So if I save that, you'll see that it's refreshing, and now it caused the browser to refresh. Okay, great. So we're here. So we have, let's inspect this. I'm going to try to make this a little bit bigger and bring this down. So if we look at the React DevTools gives us a components and profiler. We'll see now that we have our advanced options and manual checkbox and select there. So if I view this, so like I said, I'm curious on why we have two different ways of running it. So flex row, we have these settings. I'm going to try cleaning up our code here. So what I want to do is, I don't want installation options to be aware of if a profile is allowed to be selected or not. Like, that should only be within select profile, in my opinion. Now, I wrote this before, and I'm the one who made that decision, but no, not fix the entire file with prettier. So what we want to do is, if allow profiles, so if we're not allowed to, so let's say if not allowed, return null. So if it's not allowed, we're going to just return null. So this is not even allowed. Let's just fix that line. And what we'll do is we're going to copy this out and always return this here, which means we can remove this and that. So we've actually improved the performance of our app a little bit here. Before, installation options would always re-render, and also so would select profile and these other options. Now this has become a stateless component that wraps around stateful ones. So what that would means is whenever something changes, this will only render once. But if we change the default project or the profile that's selected, select profile and manual installation will be run, but not installation options. I'm going to see if I can demonstrate that as well. But first, let's run through it. Nothing is returned from render. This usually means a return statement is missing, or to render nothing, return null. Oh, because I don't know how to write JavaScript or React. There we go. You can't just have empty HTML. You've got to actually return the JSX HTML. So wait for this to load. I wonder if I can get I can probably get my Drupal site to run a little bit faster if I do have caches enabled. Yeah. It's just going to hang for a second. So here we go. So we have, this is here. Now I want to look at the validation again real quick. So like allows profile selection if the selected project and the selected project type is not equal to distribution. So let's find a distribution like open social. Which it's not pre-populating for me. What about Commerce Kickstart? There we go. All right, Commerce Kickstart is a install profile. So as we see, we hid the select profile option. So if I close this, I change it back to Path Auto, we see install profile. If I put it, even Drupal Commerce, we see it. But then if I do Commerce Kickstart, we hide the install profile. And that was actually pretty snappy. What I'm curious about is running it with the profiler. So that's interesting. That might be a bug, is when you remove the project name, it doesn't clear the input. I'm actually going to open an issue for that real quick. Deleting project name from search does not clear out the form. I'll just try to quick. Clearing input from downshift combo box does not reset the form state. That's good enough for me, because I know the problem at hand. I can come back and triage that. Typically that's not good enough. So I want to test a render real quick. So I'm going to turn on the profiler. I'm going to start recording it, and let's do password policy. We have to install profile, and then let's change it to Commerce Kickstart. I'm going to stop the profiling, and we should see that project autocomplete did a re-render. Core version did a re-render. Here we got the version number re-rendered, and because it did not render. So let's look at here, installation options. I was hoping I could read this a little bit better, but not so much, because we did various operations. But it should be a lot more performant now. Let's look at the logs actually. Cannot read. Oh, what is this? Cannot read map of undefined. So that's one issue, JSON.list. That's because we got a 404 on the releases. So I'm going to go quick fix that actually. In here. So we received a 404 on here, which I'm kind of concerned that we didn't receive. Network lost it, but I'm kind of concerned that the 404 didn't return an error. 0 not found. Well, that's, so we logged it there. So I'll do if JSON dot has own property list. That's like doing an is set in PHP. So we'll just do that to kind of quick fix it. All right, I just want a quick look at, so installation options, we have this here. I'm going to fix the file with prettier, which fix current file. Sometimes I feel like prettier makes things unpretty, but it's nice to have at least standard formatting on everything here. JSX not allowed with files in .js. I feel like we need to configure prettier in here to ignore a few of those things. Let's see if I can actually go to core. Prettier ignore, prettier rc.json. Let's see. I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna paste it into our theme. We'll see if that does anything. JSX. What's the rule called? React JSON JSX. Not sure, but we'll just skip that. So the manual installation checkbox, that's all updated. The select profile. So we get these values. Profile selection is allowed. If actually what we should just do is if selected project, we're going to return null if there's no selected project to help clean this up a bit. And we can actually move this to be above here. I don't know, like something like this, if there's any proper way of where you should place it in your code, but we're going to do it there. And we actually don't need this allowed selection to be a constant anymore because I'm pretty sure it's only used there. And so if, there we go. So if selected type, this reads a little bit better. So if there's no selected project, we return null. If the selected project.type is distribution, these could be merged into the parent one, but I like having them be a little bit more explicit because this means no data. This means something about the data. So we do a valid check, which probably could just do an array filter and then check if there's anything allowed. Where is valid using? Okay, so is valid. So let's change is valid. This actually has nothing to do with it being valid. It means if it allows the umami demo. And the umami demo was added in 8.6. So somebody was, which, you know, I feel like we don't even need this because people probably shouldn't be allowed to run 8.5 or lower since they're not secure. Even 8.6 isn't. But we're going to rename this to be refactor, rename is umami allowed. That just reads a little bit more easy or easier for a newcomer that comes into it. All right. So I think I'm happy with this little bit of a refactor. This doesn't really touch anything too extreme. Selected project, the Drupal version, the install profile, and setting the install profile. And again, these are all items that are passed down through the context provider. So this set install profile comes from here and is part of the state used inside of the context. So I'm going to go ahead and make a commit for just these two items. Refactor the installation options component. Let's commit there. So again, when people say refactor, it doesn't necessarily need to be like this huge rewrite. Like what the main thing I did is I took this out of the app.js so that way it was in its own file. And then I took all these like subcomponents that were in it into their own components. And the beautiful part is now installation options is stateless, but these now have all of their data contained within them in a stateful component. Before, all that extra data is being maintained in installation options. Now we've got a nice, simple component here. I think another word is like called functional for stateless. And now we have, or pure, sorry, a pure component there. And now we have these stateful ones, which might be called like functional, or I don't know what the term might be. So I'm happy with that. Let's move on to the next. What might be the next one? So if we go to app.js, we have the Drupal core selector, Drupal core version selector. So let's go ahead and move this out into its own thing. So go and do components. And I'm just making files named after the component. I'm not doing anything too fancy in terms of file structure. So let's import React from React. The cool, real quick, what version of React do we have? We have 17. So maybe it's just because of Webpack. Because with React 16, I believe, you don't need to have this in your code. But it could be because we're using an old version of Laravel Mix. So I'm going to delete that. Let's paste it here. And we'll do export default is Drupal core version selector, and import. We'll do the import there. And this is going to be doing a few refreshes because every time I tabbed from a file, PHP Storm did an autosave, which triggered probably a whole bunch of changes. So one thing I want to do first before I refactor it is let's make sure that I didn't break anything. Like when we pick a project, we should still see the Drupal core version. So if I go to password policy, there we go. Use state is not defined. So I'm going to do, so there's this little like light bulb over here and do insert import. What I normally would do is I hold down the option key because the option key does the same thing. So now save. All right, I had to manually save it. It didn't auto save for me. So if I do password policy, again, use effect. There's so many errors in here from prettier. So how about first we do fix the current file with prettier, use effect. Now I more easily see that. Again, I'm using the option key, which I think option is also alt in Windows. I don't know. So I'm going to use import React from use effect from React. It adds it into here for us. And I did a save. And it's reloading. All right, great. So now we see our Drupal core versions. One thing I wanted to share too, for anybody that's watching this and maybe doesn't do Drupal and React, I use Laravel Mix with my front end theming. So I have that browser refresh set up. In my local Drupal sites, I have all of my render bins turned off. So render, page, dynamic page cache are set to null. And then in my development services, I have Twig debug turned on usually. And when I refresh, that means like editing any Twig files, any CSS, JavaScript, it's reloading for me. So you get like the hot reload effect. Well, not hot reload because it's actually reloading, but that way you get a much snappier and more efficient Drupal theming experience. If anybody think that'd be interesting, I could do a video on that. Okay, so we have this working here. If I look at my context provider values, we still see that the Drupal core version is adjusting. So let's go ahead and see what we can clean up in here. Let's start with, it's one component, but I see we fetch this data here. It has its own state that manages the known Drupal versions. Is Drupal core based on the selected project. and then we do a fetch. So why don't we move out? This is a function I should probably move into a utility, but let's call it function fetch releases. And we're going to take the release URL and a callback. So what we'll do is we're going to, I didn't copy all of it. We're going to copy this. And if JSON has own property list, we're going to just say callback JSON.list. So what this will do is this function receives the URL. We're basically abstracting this out. I do this a lot of times with render callbacks or like stateful callbacks. So I have one fetch function and then I just pass different setters. So we're going to make this be fetch releases with the callback. So we can change this to just be fetch releases, release URL. And we can have it be list. And we can remove this here. So we reduced some of the duplicate code there, or we abstracted out some of that code. And the idea is that as we go through anything that fetches remote data, and if we move these into functions that are above the component, we can more easily identify and normalize them and create like a utilities file that has some of these shared requests in it, or shared request helpers. Again, let's make sure nothing broke. Perfect. And if I go to 8.1.8, we see Drupal 9. What's this error here? Each list should have a unique prop key. So let's go fix that too. I didn't notice that before, but in select profile, this here, we need to have the key be umami. We'll just have the key be the same as the value. And this is used as part of the, whenever there's dynamic elements, you set a key, and that's used as part of the render tree diffing, or that's my understanding of it. So it has its own like shadow DOM, might be the wrong word. But the idea is that specifying a key allows it to have more performance diff checking to see if a element was added or removed and the order of which it was. So we'll quick fix that here. So again, if I do path auto and I change the version to something that supports Drupal 9, no more error, and we see the umami demo. So we can install path auto with the umami demo. So let release URL, if Drupal core, this is here. So if it's Drupal core, we fetch the version directly. Otherwise, we find compatible versions with that version of Drupal core. So if project short name is equal to Drupal, we return null. So what we could do, I wonder if I don't know if this is a good idea to do above a side effect or if it's allowed. So let's see. There's certain rules. I think you have to do it below hooks like this, but not above an effect. But the idea here is that if we're testing Drupal, we don't need to fetch the Drupal core versions. But we might have to. So context provider values the Drupal version. So you can see here that we don't render the Drupal core selector because we're testing Drupal core. Let's pick 9.3.x, and everything did update. So let's move. Maybe we can simplify this a lot more. So we have that is core if is core. We don't need this else if check anymore because we're not showing the core versions for Drupal core. So we can make this be a constant. So we can make it, now we've simplified this a bit, we can make it a constant. And set the Drupal versions to be that release and set the Drupal version. Just so you know that somewhere in the code, now I can't remember where. I have to look and see. So here we have it. So set main project says if the short name is Drupal, so if we're testing core, set the project version as well, which means that we don't need this component to run. Kind of feels icky in a way because we have this logic in two different areas, but I feel like it makes it a little bit more performant, a little bit more clear. It removes some complexity because we don't need to, it removes an additional fetch because we don't need to fetch that data. So we have the release URL is here. We call it, we set the list. Right. Part of me wants to remove a bit of, I want to normalize this a little bit more. So I actually want to just call, I want to do callback on JSON. But I broke that. Yeah. So what I want to do is callback. I want to call the callback on JSON. And let's change this to be set. I'm going to duplicate it. Nope. Let's do this here. So I want to pass set Drupal versions as a callback, which it's going to break when it reloads because it expects Drupal versions to have been processed. So we can do, I should have saved. One second. Before I go too far ahead and do this, let's save the original and set the callback to be set Drupal versions. And what we can do here is Drupal versions.map. We're going to do a double map, which maybe we don't even need to do anymore. So we would do Drupal versions dot list. Oh, I guess that might be one reason that I had it that way, is to ensure that there's always a dot list available. Because if I go here, it's in the middle of a reload. It's going to crash because cannot read property map of undefined. So what we can just do is instead have it be, we'll just keep this callback, or the original callback of, we have JSON, and if JSON.list, I'm not going to get too fancy with it. We don't need to be over the top. Let's see if it's compiling. Yep, we'll wait for it to go compile. Let's do path auto. And we should have all of our core versions working. If I pick Drupal core, rendered fewer hooks than expected.
one is Core Martial Arts and Fitness Inc. at 342 Peterson Road, Libertyville. The second one is Core at 300
Google, stop.
Crystal Lake. The third one is
All right.
Core Retail Technologies at Kenosha.
I triggered my Google Home somehow. So it rendered fewer hooks than expected. So that means we cannot have this here after all. So my fancy idea of this hook didn't work, but what we could do is put the early return inside of the side effect. So in the side effect, we say, hey, we're using Drupal core, don't run the effect, otherwise run the side effect. So again, let's try that again. Another reload. And I think overall, this is about as clean as this one can be. Disabled if not selected version. Oh, if somehow this got exposed ahead of time. But this doesn't make sense anymore because we need to have the selected version for this to render, which means that this could be pre-rendered when it shouldn't be. So I feel like we need to have if no selected project and no selected version. We return null. When do we call this? Drupal core version selector. So we wrap it here as can launch, which means that we don't render it ahead of time unless we're able to launch, which knows that there's a project and a version. But I want to put some of that logic in here. So why don't we do a const? We'll call it can render, and we'll set can render. That sounds horrible. We'll call it naming things is hard. But what we'll do is then we'll have here like if Drupal versions is equal to an array, we're going to return. No, that sounds weird either. Like we want it to render because what if there's a bug? Like we want it to render if there's a bug. So we're going to do disabled is Drupal versions is equal to an empty array. I don't know how we could get to this state, but I'm trying to just do some kind of hardening. Because right here, this shows that we could end up making a query for a bad URL. So let's see if I stopped any bugs from showing up. So we see our core version. Let's get Drupal 9 support in there. Now let's change to Drupal core. Oh, that's interesting. All right, I guess I need to bring this back a lot because I broke something there. Nope, I didn't. Let's do. So we have Drupal core. Yeah, I'm gonna walk it back. I overdid it without testing enough. So I just want to go, well, this can stay. I can do this. I can do, all right. I want to go back to where I know things were working, where we prevent it from rendering if the short name is Drupal and all these handful of things. All right, so that's working there. Now if I do Drupal core, all right, so it hid Drupal core, and if I go to my state, we'll see that changing this causes the Drupal version to update. All right, we're back to something that works. Not sure how I managed to break it, but I think I'll leave it as is. But we can move. Oh, wrong button. So I feel like we could at least move. So what's interesting is this is core check. We actually can't, or maybe we can place it up in here. So let's try moving this out to here. And we'll at least move that out, that logic. And to do, we do not need to fetch Drupal core versions. Try to get too fancy, and I managed to break something. So I want to try to get a little bit closer to where we were. So if I do Drupal core, show the advanced options opened. Now if I do path auto, and this will now set Drupal version to 8.9.8, but if I go back to Drupal core, we'll see that, oh, that's interesting. Wait, additional projects. So when it changed it, it actually didn't cause, so that's an interesting bug. When it didn't change, when it updated the core project. So if I go back to path auto, and if I change the core version to be 7.8.0, we'll see it's here as 7.8.0. But if I went to Drupal core, oh, it fixed. Before it didn't. There might be a bug in there somewhere. But what I want to do is not require fetching data if it's Drupal core. So let's do if is Drupal core, return null. I want to figure out why this broke. Wait for this to refresh. Oh shoot, and I forgot today I have to cut it a little bit earlier. Usually I try to do a 2-hour stream, but we've got some fun things going on now that the weather kicked up, so I'm gonna have to sign off in a few minutes. But I'm starting to feel better about, even this little change makes me feel a little bit better about the code. Because what I'd like to eventually do is use Jest, or Cypress lets you do unit testing of components as well. But I'd like to get Jest involved and start doing individual component testing instead of overall end-to-end testing. Wait for this to load. So now Drupal core. One thing I'm going to make a quick note for myself. Note, we need a test that selects Drupal core version, assert state, selects a contrib, core version, assert state, back to Drupal core version, assert state. That's a test we don't have. That kind of flips around and sees that like our data doesn't get all garbled. So I did core here. It's hidden. If I pick 8.5, we see core versions 8.5. If I go to path auto, this changed. So here we go. Something broke. Okay, so something broke. And that's because the selected project, this constant didn't refresh on the rebuild because it's from the initial render. So we cannot do that. So to kind of explain that part, when this component was first mounted, this this constant was defined and is never refreshed unless the component's fully re-rendered, which the component will not fully re-render since the properties were not, there's no incoming props. It will re-render the HTML based on state changes here, but this constant is kind of stuck. So we can't use that. So I'm going to delete that and also paste it here again. And fix it there. And I think I did something like that, which is what caused the grief earlier. All right, so let's do path auto. 8.8, 9.2. All right, let's do Drupal core. 7.0. So there's, okay, the Drupal version does get messed up in here somehow. Now if I go back to path auto, this gets all out of sync. So I'm going to stop that. I feel like that is what was causing a lot of the grief, is that check on not fetching the versions. Maybe. Or it could just be a long-standing bug. So to do, there can be bugs when toggling between core and contrib. And unfortunately, saving the comments is going to cause a refresh. So yeah, so we definitely, that is a test we definitely need to get added for this to work. So path auto, yep. Do Drupal core. Yeah, so it ends up setting the Drupal version to the old. Oh, shoot, that's it. I know why it's happening. So this version, it's like the version is delayed. It's like picking the old version in here. To do this is somehow picking the old project version if changed from contrib to core. And set Drupal version is the list. I wonder if it's because I'm cutting this out early. But that doesn't make too much sense. So there's definitely a bug in there. So I think I'm just going to leave this be until this can be figured out. But what I will do is I will at least refactor this into a callback. And I'm going to edit my comment here. selected Drupal version gets weird. See. And I could fix this now, or I could like stop my refactor and fix it, but I know that my refactor is focusing on that data point, around this idea of there's the selected project and the selected version. I want that version value to be nested within the project itself. So that's where I'm going to just document it and try to fix it in this path. Let's do one last quick test with the change on this refactor from fetch releases. And we'll say Drupal core. Value, the Drupal version is 8.3 beta 1. Commerce. So that's, yeah, so it's like the Drupal core version needs to reset too. So what I want to do is maybe this could fix it. So we need an effect on, that's on mount, selected version, selected project. So this sets the install profile there, set can launch. Shouldn't have that dependency inside of there. So we need to have a So what needs to happen here is we need to reset the selected, the Drupal version if the project changes. So I guess maybe I don't even need it to do there. What we can try to do is use effect. All right, I need to go, but I really want to try to just get this quickly. So selected project, set Drupal version to null, maybe, to not there. What do we have here? Drupal versions. What do we have up here as Drupal version is an empty string? So I think maybe that would do it. It's hard to know because things are going to get all kinds of. So we pick this. It's 9.5. And we get the Drupal version of 9.5. So let's pick commerce. And it didn't reset that here. So let's go to Drupal core selector. So I feel like maybe we need selected project, selected version. Network tab. We got a not found. Oh, wait, why is it not proxying to? One second. I want to copy this here. That really did return a not found. All right. So, oh, wait a second. That's because it picked. Why did it pick 9.5? That's not a commerce version. All right. So this fixes it a little bit. So what I know what we need to do. Here we go. Whenever this selected project changes, we need to reset the Drupal version and selected version, which should go somewhere else possibly. Set main project in the version. So let's try this. 8.1.2 components value 8.1.2. Let's pick commerce. So it still did the same thing where it fetched from the old versions. Project autocomplete, project selection, on change, project and version. So set project. So yeah, I feel like yeah, that's where so we need to use effect. This needs a side effect that when the project changes, set version to be an empty string. I think this might fix that bug, which shows like this is one reason there's a refactor, because stuff is all over the place. And I'm going to test this, and then I need to run. So Drupal core, pick a core version. So that's 6. Now if we go to commerce, now it picked. No, all right. There's bigger bugs in here than there's. Instead of chasing this right now, I'm gonna wait till I get more of this refactored and cleaned up so I can have a better picture. Let's see. So this clears out those in the launcher. We'll leave that. Actually, this isn't the right to do. It's kind of the right to do. Drupal core selector. We have that there. All right. Let's do refactor Drupal core version selector. And this is a good start. So inside of our advanced options, we now have these, the manual install and install profile and Drupal core refactored into their own components, and kind of found some bugs. The next step will be this additional projects and even the advanced options. It's like advanced options, patches, the patches module or the patches component, wherever that is. Oh, patches in its own file, and it's got. We should actually just move that state into there instead of it being passed by props. But that will be for next time. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope that was interesting with some React refactoring. So have a good one.